The Dutch government blocked Kyndryl's acquisition of Solvinity over national security concerns. But the real story isn't the block. It's how the Dutch government and many others accidentally built a single vendor monopoly in critical infrastructure through routine procurement decisions. This is EconWorks. In this episode, we are looking at dangerous lock-in through repeated government contracts, why the traditional antitrust tools are powerless in these cases, the true trade-off between digital sovereignty and scale, more intelligent market design solutions that can deliver security and competition.
So on May 25th, 2026, the Dutch government basically slammed the door on this massive American tech company.
Right, Kyndryl, I believe.
Yeah, exactly, Kyndryl.
Yeah.
So they were trying to buy this local Dutch tech firm called Solvinity, and the government just stepped in and formally blocked the sale.
Which, I mean, if you just read the headline, it sounds like a massive win for protecting citizen data, right?
Oh, totally. Like a local company stays local, foreign hands are kept off the servers, everyone cheers. But the truth is, that celebration was masking a pretty terrifying reality.
It really was.
And so, welcome to your custom deep dive. Today we are exploring a really fascinating set of materials you sent over to us, which is this article and a brilliant set of infographics from EconWorks titled The Lock-in Problem.
Yeah, it's an incredibly revealing set of sources.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to look at that Dutch headline and reveal what it actually exposed, because it's this massive, completely invisible vulnerability in how governments around the world buy technology.
And honestly, the EconWorks material illustrates something that people really struggle to grasp, which is that our biggest infrastructural vulnerabilities aren't born out of, like, dramatic espionage or cyber warfare.
No, it's not some movie plot.
Exactly. They're born out of something much more mundane, just routine paperwork.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand what the EconWorks article is telling us, we kind of have to transition away from that surface-level news of the block sale.
Yeah, because while keeping an American company from buying a Dutch one made sense on paper, it completely missed the real mystery hidden underneath it all.
Right. The intervention treated a symptom. It stopped one specific foreign acquisition.
But the underlying disease, the actual structural vulnerability, was just completely ignored. The central premise we actually need to focus on is this. How did one single company get so much unchecked control over a nation's critical infrastructure to begin with?
Yeah, so let's dig into the specifics of why the Dutch government was so panicked about this acquisition in the first place. Like, who is Solvinity, and why did the thought of them being owned by an American company cause literally a five-alarm fire in the halls of government?
Well, the panic really stems from the system Solvinity operates. According to your sources, they run a platform called Digid.
Right.
And we have to be really clear about the scale here. I mean, this isn't just some niche piece of software used by a few bureaucrats. Digid is the foundational digital identity system used by millions of Dutch citizens every single day.
It's basically the skeleton key to civic life. Like, it's how you do your taxes, it's how you log into your healthcare portal to see your medical records, it's how you apply for government benefits.
Exactly. So you can imagine the sheer volume of sensitive data flowing through those servers.
It's massive.
The government was absolutely terrified that foreign ownership of the company running Digid could suddenly put all of that highly personal citizen data at risk, subject to foreign laws or corporate priorities.
Right. It actually makes me think of an analogy. Imagine you live in a house and you find out someone you don't fully trust is about to be given a key.
Okay.
So you immediately change the locks on your house to keep that stranger out, which makes total sense, right?
Right. Reasonable reaction.
But then, after the new locks are installed, you look around and realize you've accidentally locked yourself inside with a single, incredibly demanding landlord.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And this landlord already controls your thermostat, your water, your electricity, and you can't leave. You successfully kept the stranger out, but you are completely at the mercy of the person locked inside with you.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. You barred the door, but you're still entirely trapped.
Exactly.
And what the EconWorks article highlights so well is that these types of monopolies, where a single entity controls the lifeblood of a system, they aren't usually formed by aggressive corporate mergers or hostile takeovers in the free market.
Right. It's not a movie villain scheme where some tech baron deliberately corners the market.
Not at all. It happens through incredibly boring, everyday government purchasing. It happens one routine contract renewal at a time.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because if a vendor is offering a simple, low-cost solution, isn't sticking with them just good business sense? I mean, if you're the government and you find a company that does the job cheaply and effectively, why fix what isn't broken?
It sounds perfectly logical.
Right, like if I find a good mechanic, I keep going back to them. So why is this a trap?
Well, on the surface, that logic is perfectly sound, and it's exactly the justification governments use. But to see the trap, we have to walk through the anatomy of the lock-in cycle that's detailed in your sources.
Okay, walk me through it.
It starts exactly as you said. Governments love simple, cheap, easy solutions. Writing a request for proposal, an RFP, for a massive tech overhaul is grueling work.
Oh, I'm sure it's a nightmare of red tape.
It really is.
Yeah.
So bureaucrats want a vendor who just says, hey, we can handle all of it.
Which, to be fair, taxpayers generally want too. Like, we want efficiency.
We absolutely do. So the government awards a massive foundational contract to a single vendor. 5 years pass. The contract is up for renewal.
Okay.
Now, writing a new bid, finding a new vendor, and moving all that data sounds like a nightmare. So purely because it's convenient, they award the next contract to the exact same vendor.
It feels efficient in the moment.
It does, but what they don't realize is that they are incurring this massive hidden cost that compounds over time.
Oh, I see. Because with each new contract, the vendor gets deeper into the system. It's like, think about how annoying it is to switch your entire family from an Apple ecosystem to Android.
Oh, that's the worst.
Right, you lose your shared calendars, your purchased apps, your photo libraries. Now multiply that headache by 1 trillion, and you have a government trying to switch cloud providers.
Exactly. The plumbing gets hopelessly tangled. With every renewal, the vendor's proprietary software, their unique data formats, and their specific operational quirks become the very foundation of how the government functions. And eventually, institutional knowledge starts to disappear from the government agencies and lives entirely within the vendor's staff.
Wait, so nobody in the government actually knows how the system works anymore?
Pretty much. They just know who to call. And eventually, the hassle and the sheer financial price of switching to a new provider become completely overwhelming.
Because the switching costs skyrocket.
These skyrocket to the point of absurdity. And once those switching costs become too high, the vendor essentially becomes a de facto monopoly provider.
Just by default.
Right. Not because they conquered the market through ruthless competition, but simply because the government prioritized short-term administrative convenience over long-term technological flexibility.
They paved the road to their own capture because it was the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Like they accidentally built a massive, impenetrable wall around Solvinity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can start to see why the Dutch government's victory in blocking the Kyndryl sale was actually incredibly hollow.
Right, let's look at what that block actually left broken. The intervention happened, the sale was stopped. But what is the reality on the ground the morning after the celebration?
Well, the stark reality is that Solvinity still holds an absolute monopoly over Digid.
So nothing fundamentally changed.
Nothing changed. Furthermore, when the current contract eventually ends, a foreign company could still submit a bid and win the next open process. The core danger of relying entirely on one single vendor hasn't been mitigated in the slightest.
The government merely changed who owns the monopoly.
Right.
Look, they kept it Dutch for today, but they did absolutely nothing to address why the monopoly exists in the first place.
Exactly. The trap is still perfectly set and fully operational.
They just paused the timer.
Yep. The vulnerability is entirely structural. They stopped a localized symptom, but the underlying disease remains untouched.
And if a highly developed, tech-savvy country like the Netherlands fell face first into this trap, they probably aren't alone, right? I mean, we have to assume this is happening elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. The EconWorks material maps out a global lock-in crisis. Routine buying decisions have created these identical traps all over the world, and the fallout is starting to become highly visible.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you look at the international data in the sources and you realize the entire globe is sleepwalking into monopolies just because bureaucrats don't want to rewrite standard operating procedures.
It's crazy.
It's a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying insight into human psychology. Let's unpack some of these international failures, like start with the United Kingdom.
So the sources highlight a period where the UK engaged in heavy outsourcing of their government services to single, massive contractors. They handed over everything from facility management to IT infrastructure.
Wait, like everything?
Pretty much everything. And the mechanics of this failure are textbook lock-in. The government became so dependent that the proprietary knowledge of how to run these public services lived entirely with the contractors.
So when one of those mega contractors eventually collapsed financially, which I think happened a few years ago, it wasn't just a corporate bankruptcy. It led to massive disruptions in public services.
Right, because the government couldn't just step in and take over. They literally didn't have the blueprints or the access rights to their own systems.
That is wild.
They had no backup plan because the contract was designed under the assumption that the vendor would always be there. And, it's not just Europe. The sources point to the United States, too, specifically the Pentagon.
The military. That seems like the last place you'd want a single point of failure.
Which makes their initial approach so shocking. The Pentagon initially attempted to award one giant single-vendor cloud contract worth billions to handle massive amounts of military infrastructure and data.
Just a one company.
Yeah, they wanted the convenience of a one-stop shop.
But the sheer scale of military operations running on a single company's proprietary servers? I mean, that's a strategic nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
If that one cloud provider goes down or gets compromised, the entire defense grid is blind.
Exactly. And they eventually realized that immense strategic risk and had to aggressively pivot to a multiple vendor approach. They basically had to scrap the single provider dream because the lock-in risk was deemed a literal threat to national security.
Okay, so what about Denmark and Germany? Because the sources mentioned they're taking a different route.
Right. Both of those countries are currently pushing hard for open source technology. They've recognized the dangers of large vendor lock-in and are actively trying to build systems based on open standards.
Okay.
And to understand why this matters, you have to look at the mechanics of open source versus proprietary software.
Open source meaning the underlying code, like the blueprint, is publicly accessible rather than being a secret formula owned by one corporation, right?
Exactly that. If a government builds its infrastructure on proprietary software, firing the vendor means losing the software.
You have to start over.
But if they build on open source standards, the government retains the blueprints. They can fire the contractor who manages the system today and hire a new one tomorrow without having to rebuild the entire digital foundation from scratch.
Okay. But not everyone is learning that lesson. The sources flag Australia as well.
Yeah, Australia is currently facing intense domestic criticism. Despite watching these failures cascade globally, they're repeating these exact same single-vendor risks in their recent massive IT deals.
You'd think they would have looked at the UK or the US and pivoted.
You would think. But they are signing contracts that guarantee they will be locked into proprietary ecosystems for the next decade.
It really is a global epidemic of bad buying. But that leads to the core dilemma, I think. Like, we understand the global problem, we see that everyone is doing it, but why is it so hard to escape?
Right.
If all these smart people in all these countries know it's a trap, why do they keep signing the contracts?
This raises an important question, and it brings us to the core economic dilemma at the heart of the lock-in problem. The sources define it as the sovereignty versus scale crossroads.
Okay, let's break down the scale side of that crossroads first. What are we actually talking about when we say scale in this context?
We are talking about the hyperscalers. Cloud computing and modern digital infrastructure are dominated by a very few massive tech giants, primarily based in the U.S.
The big guys.
Right. We call them hyperscalers because their economies of scale are almost unfathomable. They operate millions of servers across the globe, they employ armies of the world's best cybersecurity experts, and they pour billions into research and development.
Okay, so I imagine it's like trying to build your own massive power grid from scratch just for your house, rather than plugging into the city's grid. Like, plugging in is cheap and reliable.
Exactly.
Building your own power plant is wildly expensive and probably won't work as well.
That's the perfect comparison. Building a competitive, local, sovereign alternative from scratch to match the efficiency and security of a hyperscaler is incredibly expensive and notoriously difficult.
Yeah, a single country's domestic IT budget simply cannot compete with the R&D budget of a global tech giant.
So countries are basically standing at this crossroads asking themselves a terrible question. Do we have to create our own clunky, expensive domestic monopoly just to achieve digital independence?
Wow. And that is the false choice they feel they are facing. They desperately want isolation and sovereignty to protect their citizen data from foreign intelligence laws.
But the cost of building an isolated sovereign cloud is enormous.
It seems like attempting to build those isolated clouds usually just shifts the problem. Like, you trade a highly efficient global monopoly for a less efficient local monopoly.
Right.
As the sources point out, that isolation leads to higher costs and severely limited innovation. You're safe from the outside, but your tech is slow, expensive, and falls a decade behind the rest of the world.
It feels like a choice between risky dependence on a foreign giant or risky isolation with an inferior domestic monopoly. It's a paralyzing dilemma for procurement officers.
So what does this all mean? How do governments actually break this cycle if neither path at the crossroads looks remotely good?
The bottom line from the EconWorks sources is that monopoly, whether it's foreign or domestic, is not the only option. Governments don't have to choose between those two bad paths.
Okay.
They can demand smarter setups through what the industry calls hybrid multi-vendor design.
Hybrid multi-vendor design. Break down the mechanics of what that actually looks like in practice. How does it stop the lock-in?
It requires fundamentally changing how the government writes its RFPs and contracts. Instead of handing the keys to the entire kingdom to one vendor who promises to do everything, you use multiple vendors at once for different layers of your infrastructure.
So you spread the risk.
Exactly. But crucially, you legally and technically require their systems to talk to each other seamlessly. This is the concept of interoperability.
Oh, okay. So it's like building a house. But instead of letting the plumber use weird custom-sized pipes that only they manufacture, you force them to use standard universally sized pipe fittings.
Right.
That way, if you fire the plumber, any other plumber in the world can step in and attach a new pipe without ripping out the walls.
A brilliant way to visualize it. You force the plumbing to be standard, not proprietary. And by doing that, you can mix global scale with local control.
Give me an example of how that mix works, like in reality.
Sure. A government can use the massive, highly efficient global hyperscalers for their everyday non-sensitive computing needs, like hosting public websites or running basic administrative software to get that incredible speed and cost saving.
Makes sense.
But they mandate that this global system must interoperate with a separate, highly secure local network where they keep their most sensitive citizen data, like the digit information.
Oh, I see. So you get the best of both worlds, the resilience and efficiency of the global grid combined with the security and sovereignty of a local vault. And because the connections are standard, if the global vendor raises their prices or gets bought by a hostile entity, you just unplug them and plug a different vendor into the standard fitting.
Precisely. But achieving this requires profound intent. The Dutch block of the Kyndryl sale was just a smart security patch on a bad system.
Right.
It stopped a localized threat on a specific day, but governments will continue to accidentally build these massive monopolies until they fundamentally change how they buy technology.
And the sources make a really striking point about the law here. They state that until contracts are designed for both security and competition from day one, traditional antitrust laws will remain completely powerless to fix the lock-in problem.
That is the ultimate tragic irony of this entire situation. Antitrust laws exist to break up monopolies that form through predatory anti-competitive behavior in the free market.
Right, like standard monopolistic practices.
But those laws are completely useless when the government itself actively builds and enforces the monopoly through its own procurement contracts. You can't sue a tech company for having an illegal monopoly when you, the government, are the one who wrote and signed a legally binding contract insisting that they be your sole provider for the next 10 years.
That is quite the realization. You are essentially legislating your own captivity.
Exactly.
Well, to wrap up our deep dive today, let's just remind ourselves of the journey we've been on. We started with what looked like a dramatic, headline-grabbing national security victory in the Netherlands. A bold move to keep foreign hands off citizen data.
It was a great headline.
It was. But thanks to the EconWorks materials, we saw that the headline was actually a smokescreen for a global crisis. A crisis driven by boring, everyday government procurement, prioritizing convenience over resilience.
It's a powerful reminder that the most critical vulnerabilities in our global infrastructure aren't always the loud cinematic ones.
Right.
They are often the quiet administrative decisions made year after year by people who simply didn't want to rewrite a contract.
I want to thank you, the listener, for sharing these lock-in problem materials with us. It's been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive, and it proves that how we buy things, like the seemingly tedious mechanics of procurement, is just as important as what we buy.
Absolutely. The administrative fine print shapes the very boundaries of our national security.
And we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about that house analogy we used earlier, changing the locks to keep a stranger out, only to realize you are permanently trapped inside with a demanding landlord who controls everything, just because you didn't read the lease agreement closely enough.
It's a scary thought.
It really is. So if everyday, boring government contracts have the power to accidentally create unbreakable global tech monopolies, what other invisible bureaucratic systems in our daily lives are quietly dictating the tools, services, and choices we're allowed to have? Until next time, keep diving deep.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Econ Works. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at Econ Works, thanks for listening.